our English literature sir by our English literature sir Atchuthan Yogarajah. Now I would like to call Miss Arunavi to talk about the prose wave, which is written by Mrs. Sonali Delniakala.
Good evening, everybody. Today I want to present about the Frost Wave by Sonali Delniakala. Wave is an amazing novel which was raised from the harsh experience of the narrator, and the memoir of life after tsunami was an extract which was taken from the novel for our studies. It blossoms from the speaker's heart and connects our souls with her strong emotions. When we read this extract, readers can feel some irritation and tension because of the unexpected disaster, and it helps us to have a better understanding about our humans mindset in the those situation, and it helps us to realize the awakened motherly love for her children in the tragic situation. It was narrated from the deep veins of the narrator as the memoir of her family and parents. In 2004 December 26th, the day of darkness which darkened the people's life and left with the sad memory. It known as 2004 tsunami disaster day, the day of darkness. At the day around 7:50 a.m., the magnitude 9.0 earthquake was affecting the west coast of Sumatra and Indonesia. It was the largest earthquake ever recorded. As a result, it becomes as a big wave, which called as tsunami, which ruins 230,000 people's life around the areas of Indian Ocean. On the tragic days, Sonali Jananikala, along with her husband and two sons, Bikram and Nihil, who is known as Mali, which means little brother in singular language, and her parents were at the Jala National Park to spend their Christmas vacation. Jala Park was the direct place where tsunami arrives 90 minutes after the earthquake. We all know that the disasters are unexpected and which comes and left the people with sad memories, and it is the thing which happened to the narrator's life. Every people know about the disasters before what is was, but 2004 tsunami is something different from other disasters, as the people didn't know or have a knowledge about what this was, and it's the thing which creates the gloomy mood for this extract. When we see the background of this prose, we can understand that the narrator's pain guides her to create this amazing art which carries the pain of the individuals after the unexpected tragedy. In tsunami, narrator was injured heavily and was taken to her aunt's home in Colombo, where she's treated for his injuries. In a state of complete shock, she was unable to talk and tell her family what she had underwent during that huge disaster. Several days later, her parents' bodies were found, as well as Vikram's body. Meanwhile, her brother Rajiv organized a search for Mali's body. 4 months after the tsunami, Steve and Mali's bodies were found in a mass grave several miles down the coast. In an instant, Sonali's life had changed forever, and her present, her past, and future were gone. Her inability to accept her family and parents' death host the speaker to abuse herself in the drugs and alcohols in order to numb her pain. She was obsessed with finding the pictures of the wave and searching the internet for ways to kill herself. After many attempts to the suicide, she planned to scatter her experiences as a book and wrote this book Wave. When we see the starting of this prose, we can understand that there is no sign for harm, and people take it as a different movement of the wave for the entertainment. Oh my god, the sea is coming in. People didn't know about the tsunami was at the beginning, and it is a reason why many people die in that huge wave. If they know about the violence of the tsunami earlier, many people could escape from their death, but the tsunami was seemed as nice at the first, and then it becomes as very horrible and furious, and it paints the transformation of the innocence into evil, and it also applicable for our human world. Writer described the appearance of the sea at the beginning. The writer started to insert the tension because they started to feel different and something strange around them. Then she grabbed her two children and started to run. The grabbed paints the awakened motherly love of the narrator towards her two children who are the apple of her eyes. But when we move on, we can understand that the narrator is deeply worrying because she forgot to warn her parents about the situation which was going around them, and it conveys the big truth that according to the hierarchy of relationships, it's human nature to give the importance of the people those who loves most, and their brains are thinking a limit. That's why narrator forgot to warn her parents at the time, and she realized her mistake at the end. She started to worry about her parents, and at the time we cried for their grandparents, but Steve gives the hope to his child, and it illustrates the unlimited love of the father. And through this, we can understand the wonderful characteristic of the Steve. Then the speaker talks about the image of huge water which attacks the jeep and how they were separated from their family and injured. And then speaker add her pains into the poem during the tragedy. But overall, we can understand that her pain was not arise when she was injured by the tsunami. Her deep pain was raised when she lost her identity and her loving ones who are like her eyes. And it shows that the biggest pain in this world is losing our loving ones, and they become as our memory. And when we read this, it definitely breaks our heart and let us to think about our lives and real nature of human beings in those situations. This prose carries the love and sacrifices as a major theme. Let's analyze the literary techniques in this poem. As I told you earlier, this prose was narrated in the first person point of view. With use of visual imagery gives the literary effect to this wonderful non-fiction. The sense of their escaping from the wave on the jeep is the best example for this. Alliteration, consonants, assonance, some sound devices used in this prose in order to add the literary value and flavor. Let's analyze one past paper question for from this prose for our better understanding. The question is, the narrator in the wave helps the readers about the better understanding and the pain of the unexpected uh, tragedy. Examine the statement with the reference to the text given in the book. A Memoir of Life After Tsunami is a written experience of Sonali Jananiakala, who lost her identity in 2004 tsunami disaster. This memoir speaks about the narrator's pain after the loss of her family and parents, and it also paints the pains of individuals after the tragic incidents. Let's analyze this fact in the following paragraphs. To begin with, I want to tell the origin of this extract. After her big loss in 2004 waves, narrator started to abuse herself, and as I told you earlier, she started to abuse herself in drugs and many unwanted items in order to escape from her reality. After many attempts to the suicide, Sonali planned to convey her experiences as a book, and it's a book which carries the pain of her life after the unexpected tragic incidents during their family holiday at the Jal National Park. Oh my god, the sea is coming in. It shows the tension of the speaker when they show an unusual view of the sea. Oh my god is a diction which shows the tension of the narrator. The speaker's tone is full of fear, and the mood of this prose is something gloomy. This setting paints the feelings of the speaker after the disaster. I grabbed Vic and Marley, and we all ran out of the front door. The awakened motherly love was illustrated by this above line. She said that she grabbed her two children during that time. The diction grab shows the love which Sonali had towards the children who were apple of her eyes. Her pain was deeply revealed when she talked about her two sons after their deaths. It's hard to talk about the people who are not with us, and by putting her children whom are not with her brings the sorrow to this extract. As readers, we can realize the pain of the mother after losing her sons. According to this whole extract, Sonali felt firmly wrong when she forgot to warn her parents. I didn't stop for my parents. Her pain was revealed through her guilty conscience. She madly worried about her activities during that time. She open-heartedly told all the incidents which had happened during that disaster. The diction didn't indirectly paints the negative mindset of narrator when she wrote this uh, novel, prose. The negative feelings like pain, worries, and guilty are shown through her uses of negative words. Her open-hearted writing tells the readers that how the individuals are affected by the unexpected tragedy. We were leaving my parents behind. This line speaks a lot. The loss of her parents and the lamenting of her son for his grandparents show the poor situation which the sudden tragedy brings out. In humans' words, the biggest pain is losing our loving ones. We we can say that this tragedy distance her parents from her and it paints the worst pain of the unexpected huge waves. Moreover, even though this extract did speak about her family member situations, readers can understand that her family and parents were died because of the wave 2004. By using flashback and visual imagery as their main literary techniques, poet says the prose as her own lamenting of her life after the sudden tragedy. Furthermore, writer touches the reader's heart by giving the soul to her real experiences. That's why I firmly believes that the extract from the waves helps the readers to understand the pains which are created by the unexpected tragedy. Thank you for hearing.
Thank you, Arnavi, for your wonderful speech. Now, I would like to talk about explain you guys about the poem "The Huntsman." Actually, the poem "The Huntsman" was written by the famous modern British poet Edward Lowbury. And if we look at the Edward Lowbury's character, he's a doctor, and he has written so many interesting poems for all type of people. So this poem can be categorized as one of them, and this poem is based on a folktale theme. And the title, "The Huntsman," represents that this poem is very related to the tribe people. So if we look at the first stanza of this poem, Hagwa hunted the lion through bush and forest when he spared. One day he found the skull of a man and said to it, "How did you come here?" If we look at the first stanza of this poem, we can understand this poem's main protagonist is the person who called as Hagwa. And Hagwa is someone who is very brave in hunting, and he have been hunted many lions and tigers, so many wild animals. And the Hagwa hunted the lion. The first line represents the Hagwa's mental and physical strength, but at the same time we can find this person Hagwa as someone who is very fond of talking. So this poem finally tells us about the moral theme of this poem is think before you speak. So as everyone know, folktale used to convey any moral lesson to us at the end of the story. As this, Edward Lowery decided to put this theme into this poem. So the second line, we can find that the Hagwa has been discovered a talking skull, and here we can see that skull can't usually talk; it's a dead one. But since it has supernatural elements, we can find that Hagwa has been find a talking skull which speak to him like a normal person. But the Hagwa asked him, "How did you come here?" And the skull opened its mouth and it was saying like, "Talking brought me here." And readers can't understand what the deep meaning of these two lines about the question and answer of Hagwa and the talking skull, but at the end of the poem we can understand what is the reason for these two answers and question. In the second stanza, as I told you before, Hagwa is someone who is very fond of talking, so he couldn't able to take this thing inside of him. So instead of telling this nobody, he decided to convey this message to his country king. So he says that he was, as since he is a hunter, he was in the forest, but just because he has to say this to the king, he decided to went to the king's castle, and he was saying all of the facts that he saw with his own eyes. But as we know, a skull can't be a talking person, so the king couldn't believe what was Hagwa saying. So the king was someone we can identify the king's character as someone who is very practical and logical in a lifestyle. So he couldn't believe it. So the king decided to made a choice in Hagwa's decision that he told the soldiers to go with Hagwa and to search the talking skull over all over the country. But if he couldn't find the talking skull, then Hagwa must die in front of the soldiers. So this was the order gave by the king. But since he has too much sense of talking, he has too much sense of talking. He decided to say it to the king even before he thinks about what is going to happen. So at this point, as readers, we can understand that Hagwa should not have told this to the king before he thinks about how can a skull can talk or where did the skull come from. So the third stanza also represents what I told you before, and the last one, the fourth stanza mentions the scenery of the thing what happens after the king's order. Hagwa and the soldiers went all over the forest and country to search the talking skull. So this poem includes many type of techniques because since this is a folk tale, the writer has decided to write this poem in a very simple way with a day-to-day language, which people can understand the poem very easily. So we can see some new we can't see some new words as literature students, and also we can find so many techniques in this poem. And they rode into the forest for days and nights. They found nothing. At last, they saw the skull. Hagwa said to it, "How did you come here?" The skull said nothing, and Hagwa implored. But the skull said nothing. The guard said, "Kneel down." So we can understand what is going to happen after this incident because soldiers and even Hagwa couldn't able to find the talking skull. But finally, however, they find it. But even though the Hagwa asked, as how he asked earlier, the skull didn't open its mouth and didn't even say a single word. So this made Hagwa to stunned. But even though it's not a new thing to soldiers because they couldn't believe that a skull can talk. So the soldiers decided to kill Hagwa as the king ordered, and finally Hagwa died. But the final stanza brings more humor to this poem. They killed him with sword and spear. Then the skull opened its mouth. "Huntsman, how did you come here?" And the dead man answered, "Talking brought me here." So we can understand that the last stanza has the whole message from this poem because at the first stanza of this poem we can understand that the Hagwa was asking the skull, "How did you come here?" And the skull the skull replied usually as a human being, but here, with in front of the soldiers, the skull didn't open its mouth. So this shows how much you will get affected by the character of fond of talking. So the basic moral value of this poem written by Edward Lowery is think before you speak, because if we find Hagwa, uh, all of us as readers, we can understand this. All the readers wanted Hagwa to be serious more than being humorous. But here, this poem can be categorized under the theme of humorous, but in the real fact, we can categorize this poem under the theme of the fact of the social fact, because in the society, so many people are fond of talking, but just because of their talking sense before they think, they all of them used to fall into the bad decision at the end of their life. So the person Hagwa represents so many people in the modern world, and also as since this is a folk tale, we can understand so many hidden messages from this poem, as well as the lion represents for bravery, and the skull of a man represents for supernatural, because as kids we used to hear so many supernatural stories since which happened in the earlier tribes lifestyle. So the writer mentioned this earlier tribes lifestyle in this poem to mention that this story happens in an ancient time, which there were a king and kingdom, and there were also a talking skull. And we can categorize king and Hagwa in two different worlds, because Hagwa, since he is very brave and mentally very strength, he has so many strength that physical and mentally, but still he didn't even think before what he speaks, even in front of the king, because all of it's not about the king or a person who is very big in the society, but one should think before he speak, and one should speak what will make sense. But here Hagwa didn't think of anything, but he just go there and told what he saw in front of his eyes. But king is someone who is very logical and practical. He didn't say even a word like okay. He Hagwa was expected so many rewards and gifts for saying this news to the king. But king is not seems like he someone who get this, and someone who is ready to give gifts for him. He wanted to make sure what is the fact is. So as finally, this poem is fully based on the theme of think before you speak. Thank you. And now I'm going to explain about the poem The Wise Kind. The poem Wise Kind was written by the famous poet Stephen Crane, and he was a person who is very related to the military service of US. So if you look at this poem is filled with a ton of irony, and we can find the bitter irony from this poem. As we see, the title of this poem is War is Kind. As this is totally ironical from the exact fact, because as we all know, war is not kind. So many people have to sacrifice their life, and so many economical imbalance will happen just because of a war. But here, the writer mentions the exact opposite fact of a war, by mentioning that war is kind. If you look at the first stanza of this poem, do not weep, maiden, for war is kind, because your lover threw wild hands toward the sky, and the frightened steed ran on alone. Do not weep, war is kind. From the first stanza, we can understand that this is based on a person view of narration. Here, the narration is in a lecture type of language. The speaker asks an unmarried woman to do not worry and do not to cry, because her fiancé, who was in the battlefield, was died because of his strength that he has to die, and he mentions that the wild hands toward the sky because your lover threw wild hands toward the sky, and this line represents the bravery and the self-respect for the respect for the soldier, because he didn't die in a wrong way or in an unexpected way. He was born to die, so he died. So the speaker asked at the unmarried woman who was the fiancée of that soldier to not to cry, and the repetition, do not weep, boy is kind, we can understand that war will make so many people cry because of the lost relation and so many facts. But here he says, do not weep because war is kind, because it has a law, because it has a law of something like war is something which used to happen for serving so many people's life. But even though it's about serving so many people's life, if someone decided to serve billions of people life, then at least 1,000 people should have died. So that was the fact of war. So Stephen Crane successfully did this into this poem. We can see the second stanza, hoarse booming drums of the regiment, and we can understand that drums is an onomatopoeia. And the little souls, here we can understand that the highlighted word little souls, which means every soul is priceless. But the reason why Stephen Crane mentions the little soul as soldiers as little souls are because as usual, if we saw a war in general and if we saw a military service in a general point of view, it's about a soldier is someone who died for his country with all self-respect and with all his desire for his country. But if you look at this in a political way, a soldier is not someone who just go willingly to die. He was brainwashed by the big politicians to die for their country. But the dark side of the politics says the big politician will not sacrifice their life for their family members, but they will make the other soldiers die in order to save their life. So that is the fact of the military. So as a Stephen Crane, who was a former military servant, he understood the theme of the military service in many countries. So he admires, so he mentioned this in a general way, and that's why he mentions that little souls, which brings pity in the reader's mindset. So these men were born to drill and die. So this line is a universal fact for all the military service people, because they were born to die in a very terrible way, because you can't expect a soldier to die in a very peaceful way. He has to face many obstacles, and he has to feel many pains in the battlefield. So that's why the writer mentions that these men were born to drill and die. The unexplained glory flies above them. Great is the battle god, great is the kingdom. So the drill and die and the god great are the words of alliteration, which helps the poem to make a better understanding about the soldier's lifestyle, because this poem is filled with the fate of soldier and the bitter truth of behind every military in a country. And the third stanza, a field where 1,000 crops lie, do not weep, babe, for war is kind. Here, a second line from the third stanza, do not weep, babe, for war is kind. It by consoling a baby, by narrating the way how his father died, is a bit irony, because even the baby is very new to the world, but since it's very new to the world, the baby can't feel his father's face or his father's words, because since he is a soldier, he must die in the battlefield. So it brings an unfortunate fact of the baby, and at the same time it has been a fact for all the people for most of the people in the world who has been a son or daughter in for a soldier. And because your father tumbled in the yellow trenches, raged at his breath, gulped and died. Here, the writer Stephen Crane brought a common thing in the battlefield, which is most of the military soldiers used to die because of the trenches they had, because of the worst trenches they have in their breast. So this represents the general dying way of many soldiers, and the word yellow trenches represents the unhealthy situation of the soldier. And by again, the repetition has been do not weep, wise kind. And the fourth stanza, Swiss blazing flag on the regiment, eagle with crest of red and gold. These men were born to drill and die. As we all know, a soul can't be compared to anything, but here these men were born to drill and die, and these men are dying just because for the eagle with the crest red and gold and the Swiss blazing flag of their regiment. So even though it's proud for their life, it has be there is a dark secret that so many people are serving their health and wealth by brainwashing the other innocent souls like the soldiers of a country. So we can understand that this is a visual imagery which will help us to imagine how will be a death ceremony of a soldier. And point for them the virtue of slaughter, make plain to them the excellence of killing. And the last stanza, this is the most sensitive stanza from this poem. This is the pain of a mother, and we can understand the real face of that hidden behind the military service of many country. So, the fact is, war can only bring death, pain, and sadness to the world. It can't be a solution for anything. So that's the only thing that Stephen Crane wants to convey to the readers. That's why he mentions Mother whose heart hung humble as a button on the bright, splendid sword of your son. Do not weep, wise kind. As we know, people used to think like a soldier's death is a honorable death, even though it may seem like it's a honorable death. People, so many people are satisfying about the thousand people's death in the battlefield. So the writer mentioned so many relations in this poem just only to make the readers understand what is the real meaning of a soldier, or real meaning for a human to feel feel the relations love and not to die in the battlefield for no reason. Because even though it seems like someone is dying for their country, they are not dying for their country, but they are dying to save the politician without knowing themselves. So even though they don't know why they are dying, so many soldiers and so many men are brainwashed by the politicians in order to seems like in order to make the country wealth. But the fact is politicians brainwashed so many soldiers not to save their country but to save their pride and their happiness. So Stephen Crane wholly wrote this poem in order to make the readers understand that war and the death of a soldier is not an honorable death, but it's a death of a dark secret which is hidden behind so many politicians' face. So let's get into the past paper to get a better understanding. Why is not kind? Discuss how this idea presented in Stephen Crane's Wise Kind. In the poem Wise Kind, the writer Stephen Crane ironically portrays the pain and scary things of war by by the title. Even though the title itself seems as wise kind, the real fact that the poem shows is wise not kind at all. This answer will discuss how this idea presented in this poem. This poem helps us to realize how hard to be a soldier and how they fight for their country without any humanity. In the first stanza, the speaker requests to an unmarried woman to not to cry because her lover threw his hands towards the sky to serve his country. On the other side, it also means that soldier surrenders himself to save his life, but however, We have no clear evidence to prove the statement. Do not weep, war is kind. Here the writer uses the title as a repetition with a tone of bitter irony. Soldiers are brainwashed by some big parties in the sense of patriotism. Little souls who thirst for flight, these men thirst for fight, these men were born to drill and die. The word little souls represents the inhumanity in them. Of course, a place which is without humanity can't be filled with kindness. Even though the speaker repeats the word war is kind, he proves again and again that war is not kind but terrible. That's why he mentions many kind of human relations in military. A maiden is worrying for her lover, whereas a child and mother are worrying for their father and son. It shows how the people lost their beloved ones in the war, and in the thousands of human troops, many fathers and sons are fighting for their country as well as for themselves. Mother, whose heart hung humbled as a button on the bright, splendid sword of your son. These lines show how much memories that the victim of war have in their heart. Those soldiers have patriotism and also the love for their for themselves more than the love they have for themselves. So the speaker requests the soldiers' relatives to not to weep, so that it will be a great honor for the soldiers' sacrifice. That's why the writer says the mother is screaming her heart out for her son's life, but the fact is, these